Einen schönen Nachmittag aus London, meine Damen und Herren, so weiter ein Nachmittag unter diesen Rahmenbedingungen, abgesehen von der Wetterlage, wie sie im Augenblick in London herrscht, schön sein kann. Mein Name ist Christian Kesberg, ich bin der österreichische Wirtschaftsdelegierte für das Vereinigte Königreich. Ich danke Ihnen, dass Sie sich heute dazugeschaltet haben, mir Gelegenheit gegeben haben, mich nach Tagen wieder mal zu rasieren, mir ein Hemd anzuziehen, sogar Rasierwasser, das Sie vermutlich nicht riechen können. Ich glaube, man kann nicht ich begrüße Sie bei diesem Webinar zum Thema MedTech Innovationen für das britische Gesundheitssystem. Ich darf nachher noch ein bisschen was dazu sagen. Ich glaube, man kann heute nicht wirklich über ein Land und über einen Geschäftsbereich, über Geschäftsmöglichkeiten sprechen, ohne die Pandemiesituation kurz zu kommentieren. Erlauben Sie mir das in den nächsten paar Minuten für das Vereinigte Königreich zu tun. Die Briten sind mit 120.000 bestätigten Infektionen jetzt an sich gar nicht so schlecht, verglichen mit der Anzahl der Bevölkerung, circa dort, wo Österreich ist. Unglücklicherweise ist die Anzahl der Toten mit 16.000 um vieles höher, 8-mal so hoch, 32-mal so hoch als in Österreich, und es sollte eigentlich nach dem Bevölkerungsvergleich sollten es nur 7-mal so viel sein. Das legt die Befürchtung nahe, dass die Dunkelziffer hier besonders hoch ist oder dass die Gesundheitsversorgung um vieles schlechter ist als in Österreich. Man muss, wenn man das Britain-Bashing in den österreichischen Medien jetzt an sich vorüberziehen lässt, auch immer daran denken, dass Großbritannien wohl das einzige europäische Land ist, das eine 9-Millionen-Metropole hat. England, wo 53 Millionen der Briten wohnen, hat eine Bevölkerungsdichte, die um das 4,5-fache höher ist als in Österreich, was für eine Viruserkrankung, die von der Nähe lebt, offensichtlich ein fruchtbarer Nährboden ist. Die Briten haben nach einem Flirt mit der Herdenmentalität am 25. März die ähnlich drakonische Zwangsmaßnahmen erlassen oder verabschiedet oder eingeführt wie Österreich, ein Ausgehverbot, ein Versammlungsverbot. Geschäfte und Schulen sind geschlossen. Die Komplettisolation der über 70-Jährigen und der mit Vorerkrankungen wird praktiziert. Die Briten leiden wirtschaftlich ebenso darunter wie Österreich. Man rechnet mit einem Rückgang der Wirtschaftsleistung um 7, 8, 9, 10%. Und ebenso gleich oder ähnlich wie in Österreich wurde ein sehr großzügig dotiertes Paket an Hilfsmaßnahmen verabschiedet, dass es britischen Unternehmen erlauben soll, diese erste schwierige Phase zu überleben. Unsere Arbeit hier am Außenwirtschaftscenter London, die Arbeit unseres Teams war vornehmlich fokussiert, österreichische Unternehmen an diese Maßnahmen heranzuführen und ihnen die Inanspruchnahme zu ermöglichen. Da geht es um die 250 österreichischen Niederlassungen in Großbritannien, die 50.000 Mitarbeiter beschäftigen und fast 25 Milliarden Euro an Umsätzen erarbeiten. Die Briten haben im Augenblick zwei vielleicht sehr britische Probleme. Das erste ist die Rückkehr zur Normalität in anderen europäischen Ländern, die hier in den Zeitungen natürlich über die breit berichtet wird und die hier mit Rücksicht auf die gegenwärtige Situation unmöglich erscheint. Die Kurve der Infektionen und der Todesfälle flacht zwar ab, allerdings weitaus nicht in dem Ausmaß, dass eine Rücknahme der Zwangsmaßnahmen erlauben würde. Die Angst hier vor einem Second Peak, wie ihn jetzt Singapur erlebt, ist verhältnismäßig groß. Großbritannien ist auch ein zerrissenes Land, viel zerrissener als Österreich, wo die Bevölkerung offensichtlich sehr einhellig hinter den Maßnahmen der Regierung steht, ist das hier keineswegs der Fall. Die Kritik ist vielfach und vielzählig, hat sicherlich damit zu tun, dass das Land auch schon politisch zerrissen war, bevor das Virus zugeschlagen hat, eben im Zuge der Verhandlungen und der Auseinandersetzungen um den Austritt Großbritanniens aus der Europäischen Union. Dazu hat Großbritannien aber ein drittes großes Problem, und das ist sein Gesundheitssystem. Der National Health Service gehört zu den Briten wie Yorkshire Pudding und Roast Beef, der Nationalstolz, der Stolz der Nation, ein steuerfinanziertes System, das allerdings im Zuge der letzten 10 Jahre in dem Versuch, die massiven Kosten, die die Bewältigung der letzten Krise für den Finanzplatz Großbritannien gebracht hat, sozusagen wieder hereinzubringen, kaputt gespart wurde. Dieses National Health Service kämpft im Augenblick einen heroischen Abwehrkampf gegen den Virus, schlecht ausgestattet, personell unterbesetzt. And let me switch to English now. It seems frivolous, under such circumstances to talk about business opportunities. But because of the inherent weaknesses of the British health system that have been also brought to the surface by the pandemic, we realize that, the system is open and in need for innovation, and it's open and in need for collaboration and cooperation with Austrian and other foreign technology providers. And this seminar is about the facilitation of such collaboration and cooperation. I shall now hand over to my head of technology, Peter Pesel, who will introduce you to our exquisite panel of expert speakers and lead you through the rest of this 55 minutes of program. I would like to thank you again for your attendance. Stay healthy, make sure that everybody else in your surrounding stays healthy, and keep your spirits up. Vielen, vielen Dank und alles Gute aus London.
Thank you very much, Christian. And also thank you everyone at home watching this webinar, which is, I believe, a very, very interesting one as Christian mentioned, in a very difficult time and challenging time for everyone working in the healthcare sector. And before I introduce my speakers, I would like to invite everyone of you at home to ask questions which we will answer at the end of the webinar. And now I would like to invite my speakers to quickly show themselves and turn on the webcam. I already see the first speaker online. It's John Wilkes. He's the director and founder of UK Health Gateway, which is a market access company basically focusing on supporting manufacturers of medical devices and pharmaceutical companies to access the UK health market. He's also the founder of what is called the Academy of Fabulous Stuff, which is a web-based platform for best practice in health and social care. And I know that he's very proud of this. And for several years now, John has been helping us and working with us together to support Austrian businesses in entering the UK market, which we are very grateful for. Second speaker, I would like to introduce Hassan Chowdhury, who has the lead for digital health and data at the UK Department for International Trade. He matches the most innovative digital health firms in the UK with foreign stakeholders, governments, companies, and so on. In the past, he was also the founder of a digital health company called Health IQ, and he has many years experience consulting internationally with major medical technology and pharmaceutical companies. Hassan also holds an honorary research position at Imperial College London. And Imperial College is kind of the second home also for my third speaker, Omar Butt, who is the innovation lead at Imperial College Healthcare Partners, which is an organization that utilizes, let's say, a network of health experts to accelerate the adoption of innovation in the healthcare sector. They provide services not only to the NHS, but also to SMEs and the large industry. They also run educational programs and much, much more, which we will discuss during this seminar and webinar. He also holds an MBA from Imperial College London and has spent in the past several years in the MedTech sector as a product specialist. So with that, and before I start, again, thank you, the three of you, for joining today. And I would like to start with John about the NHS in general. So I will turn to you, Hassan and Omar, at a later point again on the topic of innovation. But just to set the scene for the Austrian companies, research institutes, and individuals at home, can you quickly, in like 1 or 2 sentences, explain how the NHS works, what is special? And as I've mentioned before, you have already experience with Austrian companies. You know a little bit how the Austrian system works as well. What is the difference, the major difference between the UK and Austria in that sense?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Peter, for inviting me to take part. And thank you, Christian, for your introduction as well. The principal thing that Austrian medtech companies need to understand is that the NHS, the National Health Service in England, is free at the point of access. So if I get ill and I'm a British citizen, I do not pay at any stage for any diagnosis or treatment that I will receive. All of the NHS is funded through direct taxation. It's about 18% of total government expenditure goes on the health service, but it's all done through taxation. So as a citizen, I do not pay any money at all in order to access my healthcare. I would say there is a very small private sector here in the United Kingdom. It's typically, depending on what you include, it's 4 to 5% of total expenditure. So honestly, if you're serious about coming into this market, it's best to concentrate on how you're going to access the National Health Service rather than concentrating on any private sector activity.
Okay. Christian mentioned in the very beginning, which I think that part was still in German, the NHS has undergone a lot of challenges in the last couple of years, decades even, because of the fact that you mentioned it is free at any point for every British citizens. So it is, what I understand, a very old system. It's more than, it just celebrated its 70th birthday. And it is also the pride of the British society. And so that there's always a big debate on finances, and it is clear, it's in the media every other day. It is outside the crisis and even before the crisis, it is struggling with, it's underfinanced, there's staff missing, doctors, nurses, and so on. And the UK has several years ago decided that they want to put the focus on technology and innovation, and they've introduced something that was called the NHS Long Term Plan. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, and what's the strategy of the UK government to actually tackle the problem of finances and keeping the system free of charge?
Yeah, the first thing I'd like to say is, yes, the NHS has had financial challenges, really driven by years of austerity following the financial crash of 2008. But actually, I would suggest to you that if you look at international health comparators, it still provides a fantastic service to its citizens. So I don't want to give any Austrian medtech companies the idea that the service is failing in any way. It's not. It's still managing to triumph in terms of its provision of healthcare to its citizens. However, you're right. It was conceived in 1948, and the world was a different place back then. If I give you an idea now, we have something like 1.5 million interactions between citizens and the NHS every day, and we have about 75% of the people who use the NHS for any particular purpose are doing so to address long-term conditions that they may have. Long-term conditions, things like diabetes, heart disease, chronic kidney disease, COPD, this kind of stuff, and mental health issues. So yes, it's creaked, but actually what it's trying to do at the moment, and over the last really 5 years, I would suggest it's been trying to do, is to reinvent different aspects of how it provides care to people. And the long-term plan focused on 5 key things that it wanted to improve upon. Number 1, how do we treat more people outside of hospitals? So how do we stop the automatic process that people expect to go into hospital to be treated? How might we treat more people outside in their communities? The second thing, how do we reduce the pressure on our accident and emergency departments? How do we redesign accident and emergency, or what you might call urgent care, in order to better serve the population? The third thing is that we need to provide more personalized care. That relies on looking at data about people, giving them responsibility for how they design their care with their consultants and such like. The fourth thing is that we must look to digital health to provide more and more solutions for how we actually engage between the health service itself and the patients. And the fifth thing, which I think personally is perhaps the most radical and important for us to do, is use data far more intelligently in order to figure out where people might get sick and how we can stop them getting sick in the first place. It's what we call here population health management, and that's certainly a very large part of what it is going forward. All I would say in respect of Austrian medtech companies is, first of all, you are very, very welcome. We really look after our Austrian medtech companies who are trying to establish themselves here. We're very keen for you to step forward and show us your innovations and entrepreneurial skills. The second thing I would suggest is, if you are going to come, you must do your homework. There are aspects of what you will need to do in order to succeed here that will be different to what you do in Austria. But those 5 elements for the long-term plan, if you have products, technologies, or services that address any of those 5 elements, we want to hear from you.
Thank you very much, John. I think in the end of this discussion, before we switch to the Q&A, we will come back again to the topic how Austrian companies can actually enter the UK market, and we come back to you as well. But now I would like to switch to Hassan and Omar because of these 5 very important points that you mentioned. I think 3 of them are very, very technology driven. And I know, Hassan, that in the past, you have been an advocate for data as well, and that people actually should be responsible for the data and actually have better insights, and that this can be a key for better healthcare as well. So before moving on to your official role now at the DIT, can you talk us a little bit more about your experience on this this thing?
Thank you so much, Peter, and to everyone, hello. Let's be very clear that the UK health system isn't sustainable in its current form, and that's why we put together the long-term plan. Sustainability comes from augmenting the staff that we have so they can do more. One way you can make your teams better and augment them is by using data better. So one of the things you can do, very interestingly, is mine the data that we have. Now, one of the problems that we have, and Omar and I have discussed this often, is that we don't have a single data set for the country. You have many different data sets. And so what's required from an innovator who wants to come into the market and support is they have to make partnerships to get hold of that data so we can make better decisions. But if you have something that can use health data and make better decisions, better algorithms, for example, then the UK will welcome you. And that's something that we're really pushing for, because if you don't know the problem, you don't know the baseline, you don't know the economics, you don't know the impact, people will not accept your innovation. And Omar is an expert in this area.
Yeah, maybe before diving into the data aspect much more, Omar, can you give us like a broad overview of the innovation ecosystem outside the NHS? So NHS is the most important part, or a very important part in that, but there are other stakeholders in place as well. And it seems like you're facilitating between a variety of stakeholders there as well. So I don't want to neglect them and set the scene here as well. What's happening outside the NHS?
Sure. So hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I hope this all reaches you in good spirits, considering the situation. The ecosystem is, in the first instance, supported by the NHS. I think the first comment to make. And it's supported by the NHS through a variety of different elements, but they mainly feed into describing the problem that all of you innovators sat in front of us will be keenly aware of. The technology is great, but the solution to the problem is what actually gets you traction. The ecosystem outside of the NHS is developed in order to accelerate the understanding of that problem, and then the development and deployment of technology from that point on. And this encompasses a host of different institutes through academia, small business, large business, clinical, non-clinical, operational components of the healthcare system that feed data through certain hubs that have established themselves. These hubs tend to be tacked onto the side of academic institutes. There is one that I'm particularly familiar with at Imperial, but Oxford University have similar outputs, and so do other universities across the UK, where they create melting pots or meeting points for individuals from certain backgrounds to come together and help curate products. All of that facilitates, of course, quick development. The important component of the ecosystem is that the expectations that Hassan briefly alluded to are already set out. What is the clinical efficacy of the product? What is the budget impact? How does this have an impact on human factors? And we'll unpack a few more of those components a bit later on. The ecosystem with that roadmap then pulls upon external resources in order to accelerate that product development, and that would be legal, that would be financial, that will be academic in terms of research, in clinical research, etc., and so on and so forth, as well as product development and industry liaison.
Okay. It sounds like there are many stakeholders trying to tackle a very complex situation and problems as well. And especially now in this current situation, we are in a health crisis, a public health crisis. Maybe the question is for both of you, have you seen anything that changed in the last weeks or 2-3 months where people are starting to use, or the government is starting to introduce short tracks for research, new developments, trying to push for standardization, people to pull people together? Have you noticed anything happening like lately?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Hassan,
to answer
please.
very quickly. Sorry, Omar, please, after you.
No, please, I insist.
To answer very quickly, we've had in the last couple of weeks more push for digital health, more progress for digital health than we've had in the last 10 years. People who were barriers to us putting digital into the right place in the right way have moved out of the way or become advocates. So you now have a very fertile environment. Whether the tech is British or foreign doesn't matter. The question is, does it work? Does it have evidence? Will it have impact, as Omar's just explained? Now, if you're going to bring an innovation into the UK, you'll find it very, very easy to get through some of the hurdles. But the thing you'll find difficult right now is to be heard, because there's so many companies trying to speak. So you have to make sure that what you say stands out. It has a track record. You need to look at some of the things that Imperial have done to help innovators look at evidence, look at impact and non-human factors, or human factors, sorry, and that's how you're going to stand out today.
I think sorry, Peter, excuse me, to add to that, there have been emergency funds of money for particularly for COVID-19 response technology, particularly aimed at fast-tracking academic research around the types of impact that I've described. And I think a little bit later on, we will start discussing why these are so important and why the system insists on this. But as Hassan says, the environment is extremely welcoming. There is a lot of noise. In fact, there were over 2,000 submissions to the COVID-19 response, let's call it portal, that was established by the NHS, through which I've been mediating and assessing the types of impact some of the interventions could have. Huge amounts of support, a lot of charitable approaches, looking at how they could deploy existing technology. Unfortunately, the system must be, as John referred to earlier, data-driven. It must have its grounding in evidence, and we've been able to discount quite a few, but there have been some great technologies that have emerged from it.
Can you give us just quickly some examples, especially examples of products that have in a very, very short period of time already emerged, and especially examples that involve international partners and collaborators?
Sure, absolutely. So let's break this down into 2 or 3 segments. So we've got response to COVID-19 and we've got response to the post-COVID-19 world. I think they're the two sort of buckets that technology falls into. Now, with regards to COVID-19 response, specifically targeted at the disease, it became immediately apparent that remote monitoring of vulnerable patients, for instance, in care homes, etc., was a major issue that had not been thought through as part of the initial plan. A call was put out by the academic health science networks, of which Imperial College Health Partners is one, requesting technology step forward in order to help with the let's say the remote diagnostics of those patients. Telehealth is the immediate assumption, but it's extremely labor intensive, and video conferencing, so to speak, particularly with older patients and those suffering from dementia that do fall into the vulnerable group, may prove difficult. The objective was to find passive technology that would supplement the command structure that has been put in place for the COVID-19 response in order to help plan capacity and also detect patients that are vulnerable that may be taking an early downturn. A company stood out from the sort of crowd with their repurposed technology, which was originally assigned as a Holter monitor for benign palpitations, or PAF, paroxysmal AF. Their particular solution was a combination of 2 or 3 technologies, actually, a device, a Holter monitor strap-on device, a center set up in the UK for interpretation, and then a cloud software provider for aggregation of data from multiple sources. Their technology was repurposed for monitoring heart rate, ECG, respiratory rate, and temperature, and it was paired with a Bluetooth pulse oximeter. The technology was deployed with a mobile phone and a data SIM card for those institutes with poor IT infrastructure, and they've been able to monitor, in particular, care homes remotely, passively, and their adoption, and sort of to answer your question, Peter, their technology is from the US, from Germany. The online services is, I think, developed in Israel. It was a whole real global effort. Their technology is already proving to be absolutely beneficial to the health system, as it offers an early warning system for those that might be, let's say, falling or succumbing to COVID-19.
It's a great example, and it also shows, I mean, we all talk about data, but we sometimes forget the devices that produce the data and the quality of the data that's being in the background. So your example shows that this is kind of, technology devices, online services, the software in the background. And then I think what we can't, or we shouldn't forget, are the end users in the end. So we have patients, we have clinicians, we have care providers that actually need to use the systems as well. Anything to add, Hassan, from your side on this question?
Yes, it's worth noting that my role at the Department of International Trade is to support all foreign companies in digital health to come into the country. And once they come to me, I then direct them to sources of support. I might send them to something where they pay for a service like UK Healthgate, or I might send them to something which is free of charge to Imperial College Health Partners, depending on the need. And when I do, I look at what I can help them with in terms of introductions and positioning. So one of the examples, we had an Indian company called Cure.ai, Cure with a Q, and they had 2 products. One is a track and trace for TB, for tuberculosis, which they adapted for COVID-19. And the other is a radiology software that can identify, using chest x-rays, potential COVID-19 scans. And I put them forward because they had already had a UK presence, they had a UK advisor, and that meant they made a commitment to the UK. And one of the challenges that a foreign company will have when they want support from the DIT is, do they want to stay remote and sell from abroad, or do they want to make a commitment to come into the UK? And if they do, there's so much support that I can give them at the DIT. And once they do, this is what happened with Cure.ai. They're now part of the teams that I'm promoting abroad. I'm supporting an Indian company with a UK presence to go out to Singapore. because it's the UK presence that benefits. So it's an unusual world where you have to do international trade, but I think Austrian companies can see that Britain gives them a gateway into the rest of the globe. It isn't just the UK market. There's a lot happening here.
Yeah, I think we're already transitioning into the third part of this conversation, is how to actually include international partners and Austrian organizations, be it from research institutes or industrial companies. Going back to you, Omar, we just mentioned you're working for Imperial College Healthcare Partners. Can you please explain us the affiliation with Imperial College and how different, you work together with industry and with universities as well in different stages? Can we walk through maybe two scenarios? One, an Austrian SME company trying to do research and trying to find a clinical research partner in the UK. Yep. And two, having an Austrian medical technology company that's trying to go to the UK market and maybe get a verification here and trying to enter the market. And as Hassan said in the beginning, using it as a starting point into other markets maybe as well.
Absolutely. So very briefly, Imperial College Health Partners is a members organization. It encompasses about 40 or 50 members who are a combination of healthcare providers, including Imperial College Healthcare Trust, as well as academia, including Imperial College University, but this is also Queen Mary's University, Brunel University, etc., etc. The reason I refer to us as a members organisation is that they all form our board. We are essentially a company set up by our customers. Now, we wear three hats in terms of the way we sort of derive our funding. We are not for profit. Firstly, we have a research platform called Discover Now, which is a consent to contact research register for clinical trials. It can work both retrospectively and prospectively and has access to 2.6 million patient records that are longitudinally linked across Northwest London. We have data that goes back about 10 years and it is linked by a unique patient identifier number and allows us to trace interaction or healthcare utilization in primary, secondary, tertiary and quaternary care, so social care as well. It's an extremely powerful tool, but I won't take up too much time discussing that now. The second funding stream is our business intelligence team. Business intelligence is the, let's call it the second components of research, or the other parts of your business case other than the clinical efficacy of your product. It's your budget impact, or for those commercially minded, it's the return on investment for the healthcare system. It's the modeled impact as well. Now, there's sort of two components to how you enter the system, which we'll talk about later. And they are also very capable and have access to the same patient records and can look at retrospective impact of innovation. Again, great for creating business cases that are used for scale and adoption. The third component of our service, which is where I spend most of my time, is an NHS England Commission, which is monitored by the Office of Life Sciences, and that is something called our Innovation Exchange. That particular work stream sees us delivering top-down delivered technology, so technology selected by the NHS locally, so we help them overcome local barriers. The other manifestation of that commission is the Innovation Exchange, where we offer advice to companies entering into the market. So to answer your questions very discreetly, Peter, with regards research, if you wanted to perform clinical research, we have in-house capabilities with the Discover Now platform, but we are also closely linked with the National Institute of Health Research, who are considered our partner or strategic partner, who are able to source, as are we, appropriate academics, clinical academics, for you to perform your clinical research trials. We can also help structure and deliver those trials for you. Again, we would select the most appropriate option for you depending on the size and the specific area of your trial. If we weren't capable, we don't have any need to try and, let's say, win your business. That's not our MO. With regards entering the UK as a market, your first point of contact would normally be through me or one of my colleagues at Imperial College, where we would help you understand your value proposition and how it aligns with the UK market. Now, as Hassan and John have alluded to, it is a very different market than the Austrian market, in so much as the subtleties of how finance is manipulated, let's say, or how it's moved around the healthcare system, and some of the cultural adoption barriers to technology that you'll need to consider as part of your sales pitch, for want of a better term. But we would help talk through that with you and then signpost you off to strategic partners like John, for instance, or other institutes who may be able to help you beyond our particular commission. But we'd certainly be able to help you identify those people that you need to play with in the UK market.
Brilliant. I see already some questions streaming in for the three of you, and I would like now, because we're in the middle of discussion of bringing Austrian companies to the UK market, I would like to invite John back to turn on his camera, and already have some questions for him here as well. The first question was, it sounds like it's an SME company, MedTech company. What sort of homework is it that is required before entering the UK market?
Well, that's a great question. To be quite honest with you, I wish most of the people who come to us would be prepared to just do a little bit of homework first before investing large amounts of money in finding distributors and that kind of activity. The homework that I think is essential, I'm sure that Omar and Hassan will back me up, is, look, you need to understand what the competitor position is going to be that you're getting into. You need to understand the clinical pathways that your product or service will follow, and they are laid down by different royal colleges and such like. And certainly you need to understand the value proposition that you are going to present to the NHS, either nationally or more likely locally. So I think that's where I would start. It's just this basic understanding from a research perspective of how you're going to pitch your product, given all of the other competitor activities that are already available within the market, and the clinical pathways which most of the healthcare providers will follow. I mean, Omar, would you like to expand?
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I would say your homework should be based on who is your beneficiary, who is your payer, and who is your user, because they're not often the same person. You want to back that up with evidence as to, well, actually, no, let me rephrase that. If your beneficiary or your user are not your budget holder, how will the budget holder, the commissioner, the payer of your product benefit from the, let's say, the adoption of your product? There is a gap there, and it needs to be explored. And there needs to be an understanding that the health system as a whole, if it benefits, is a great outcome, but often not an appropriate sales pitch or value proposition for the NHS. You really need to be addressing the budget holder. Unfortunately, there are finances involved in this situation. I would also echo what John said about the competition. What defines you, or what differentiates you from your competition in terms of healthcare provision, is not just clinical efficacy. Think about how the ergonomics and the adoptability of your product impact current service provision. Is there a long adoption process? Will there be multiple barriers put in place because of this? Have you got a passive technology? Is it active? Will there need to be retraining? How do all of these components affect your likelihood of successful transaction? And that needs to be addressed at the very start.
Yeah, I can agree with this very good point, and it is how the UK system works a little bit different than the Austrian one. And I very valid points also about the budget and the financing here to get it right in the beginning. And
one final comment on that, if I may, Peter, which is, don't assume anything. in respect of your Austrian user experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. For Hassan, one question came up because earlier we talked about going international from the UK market. One user on one audience participant is asking, for this to happen, do you need to establish a subsidiary in the UK?
I can give you the official answer, and then I can give you the less official answer. So let's keep it to that. The official answer is, if you have a UK presence, we can definitely support you for you to go abroad. But the unofficial answer is, I want to see personally, because it's a judgment I have to make, that you've done well in the UK, that you have outcomes, that you have champions, that you have use cases and case studies. And at that stage, it's easy for me to take you abroad, because you can point to people who benefited from your innovation. But the benefit that we're talking about has to be centered in the real world. It needs to be real world evidence. So those who are technically minded, we're talking about effectiveness data rather than efficacy. So we're not talking about ideal conditions. We're talking about what happened in real life. And I want to be able to see what the budget impact was, almost as much as I want to see the outcomes. And those in the NHS right now, they will tell you that for a number of years, they've been trying to save money. And the way that they've saved money is not to spend in the hope that they can save, but to just pull as much spending out of the system as they can. So if you're able to provide something that can offer in-year savings, that when it comes into the system, it's saving money before the end of the year, then you're going to have a head start. So if I can see those kind of facts and figures, and I'm going to do a background check on who's used you in the UK, then I will support you to export, no problems. But the official answer is yes, a UK presence is fine.
So because there was one question just coming in right now, which is touching up on the start, which was, is it enough to show budgetary impact based on Austrian healthcare system? So you're saying ideally you want to see numbers in the UK, right? So which means it requires you to have a UK partner showing these numbers in the UK, so Austrian numbers are just not enough.
Yes,
Peter,
could I make could I make a particular point on that? So you want to demonstrate two forms of evidence as part of your business case. The first is the modeled impact. The second is the real world impact. The modeled impact essentially gets you your trial at the provider site. The real world impact is you and your clipboard making sure that what you've claimed as part of your business case is actually achieved. And actually, I've used the wrong phrase there. It's not you. It should be a valid third party. What you want to do is devolve yourself from the development of your business case. You want to employ institutes such as the NIHR to model your budget impact, and also institutes such as in NIHR, Imperial Oxford, to model your, to collect your real world evidence. At this stage, you've removed yourself from your sales pitch, so to speak. And at this stage, you have recognized, respected third parties making claims on your behalf for the provenance and the impact of your technology, which is extremely powerful, not just for that one-off sale, you know, in a particular locality, but for national spread and adoption. You start to get the ears of the larger organizations at that stage.
Just quickly, John, do you have anything to add on that?
I think that's a really good answer from Omar, actually. I think the independence of evidence is a really key point to make. Just going back to the original question about is Austrian evidence applicable, useful? Yes, of course it is. But there's always been a sentiment in the United Kingdom that as soon as you take a new innovation to anybody, the first thing they ask is, where else is it being used? And if you can't point to a UK source for that, I think you're doing yourself a disadvantage.
I'm surprised the question didn't come up earlier, but finally the B word came up, and I'm wondering how will it affect, or will it affect anything once if it actually happens end of the year, which is still the plan, how will Brexit affect the way medical technologies will be used in the UK from outside?
I guess I'll take that one. So, so the government has made a decision to pursue equivalence as much as possible for the transition period. So for the foreseeable future, companies that are coming into this market don't have to worry about doing something different to what they normally do. There will be possibilities of changing, but everyone will hear about that at the same time, British or foreign. Don't let Brexit be any kind of barrier to you. In fact, it's actually an accelerant, because the UK needs more technology, more workers, more augmentation than it's ever done. Brexit is going to be a challenge for us to overcome. And if you can see that there is an openness from many people in this country to our friends across the water, to our friends in Europe, and there is genuinely a lot of goodwill here despite Brexit, you'll see that the Austrian innovation is very, very welcome. And I was lucky to be in Vienna last year at the British ambassador's residence, and I met many companies. I met Symptoma, for example. There's great innovation happening in Austria, and there's a lot of space for that here.
Very, very good to hear. Going back to one of these solutions and moving a bit from market entry to technology and innovation again, I start with you, Hassan, and then Omar, you can continue on one of the questions from the audience. Can you name some of the top digital health solutions that will be needed in the post-COVID-19 world? Which treatment areas will be most pressing? And there's also another question that I will just add up on this, very specifically asking on digitizing customer communication management, e.g. smart documents, if this is something that is in the pipeline. I will start with you, Hassan, and then Omar.
Thank you. We have a risk that we're spending too much focus and effort and time on COVID patients and ignoring the bulk of patients who we've left outside of the hospital environment, but they have chronic conditions. For example, they may have diabetes, they may have asthma, may have cancer. How do we look after these patients one step removed? So remote monitoring, telemedicine and telehealth, that area is a huge area. But the one that's scaring us the most is social care. The vulnerable, the isolated, those who are in care homes. How do we prevent them from coming into hospital? How do we look after them from distance? And how do we expedite a discharge? How do we get them out of hospital when they have to come in? So can we do diagnostics closer to home? Can we make decisions closer to home? Rather than forcing people to come into physical outpatients, can we do it virtually? So this is now about how we can set up a virtual pathway for rheumatology, for dermatology, for radiology, and then moving into the more difficult areas. So that's where I see the challenges.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think to somewhat echo what Hassan has already said, technology has to play a major role in efficiencies now, simply because of the backlog. So you can extrapolate from that statement where efficiencies will need to be made. So yes, on the social care, remote monitoring, telehealth front, it's an obvious one. I'd say there are opportunities in secondary care around efficiency of resource management. I'd say there are opportunities in tertiary care, mental health services, etc. I think this may allude to Peter, your final question, in the digitization of documentation. There's a fairly successful company in the UK called Thalamos, who are digitizing the not just the discharge, but the sectioning of mental health patients, and using secure platforms in order to achieve the efficiencies that the current system just couldn't imagine, and the rather antiquated way that these things are done. I'd also say the remote diagnostics component of dealing with patients at distance poses a huge opportunity. Many people have focused on the telehealth, telemedicine, face-to-face / triage component of medicine. What I think is missing are the kind of standard family doctor practices, blood draws, urine samples, etc., that could be a sort of a provision that could be done in the community or closer to home or at home, rather than having to go to a bricks and mortar institute like a GP surgery.
Thank you. And John, yes, and also maybe please answer this question, and also maybe focusing, because you have a lot of expertise on the Austrian medical technology sector as well. Maybe you can add on to it. Where do you see the strengths of Austrian suppliers, where there can be opportunities now and they can actually support innovation process in the UK?
That's a super question, and I'm delighted to do it. I think my experience of Austrian companies is they stand out for perhaps 3 elements. Number one is rigor. Typically, when Austrian companies are trying to come here, they've had to work very hard in Austria to get their product being used and adopted and so on. And I think that rigor is something that stands them in good stead. Secondly, built into that tends to be an approach to quality and effectiveness that I would laud and embrace. I think it's a huge strength. And the third thing is, they do tend to have done their homework. They do tend to know how their data can work to bring the products through successfully. If I may, around the other element we were just talking about, if anybody would like to look at a whole heap, thousands of local level case studies of local health providers doing particular projects, then do go and have a look at fabnhsstuff.net. It's a free resource for the entirety of health and social care. Things like frailty flying squads and this kind of stuff, where they're actually, these are case studies written by NHS and social care staff who've been there and done that, and now they're looking for help to scale these local level initiatives. And that is a real area where I think Austrian companies might do well in collaboration with people like Imperial College to bring their product and service forward.
One question coming up here as well, and maybe this is directed to Hassan, but everyone else, please feel free to chip in. We have Austrian companies that kind of changed the production line in the last couple of weeks and now producing something completely different than they have been producing in the past, and now going into more medical equipment and protective equipment and so on. Are there any initiatives in the UK side? Are there any fast tracks? What is the first point of contact for them in the UK, Hassan?
So there are lots of things been happening saying, if you have a way of helping us with ventilators and PPE and goggles and masks, the problem, I would say, and again, not necessarily speaking officially here, is that they are inundated. They're swamped with offers of support. So if you were thinking about trying to come in with something to support the effort, you may be at the back of a queue of 600 and 700 offers. So yes, if someone wants to make that offer, they can be directed to me directly, and I will signpost them to the right place. There are lots of interesting things available. I'm sure Omar and John will offer the same, but it's a fast-moving area. There was something called Tech Force, which offered £25,000 to each winner. Unfortunately, there was a very short deadline, so lots of companies who wanted to be part of it missed out. So very happy to help. But I would suggest that the smart way of doing this is to think mid to long term rather than short term. Because if you think short term, you'll be behind the curve, and everyone has already done it. The mid to long term issue is, how do we solve the backlog of patients who are not COVID and we need to keep them out of hospital? And when we do look after them remotely, we need to have technology. There's no other way. You may have heard that there's a problem globally with personal protective equipment, PPE. So can I look after a patient without having to put on the gloves and the mask and go over and check their bloods? Could there be a cuffless blood monitor, for example, for heart rate? Those are the kind of things that would be very interesting in the midterm. And the long term is that we have an aging population who cannot really be cured. Their conditions are chronic, they're aging. So how do we make them live a comfortable life and look after them remotely? That's the real challenge. And if we can do that efficiently with budget impact, you will win this market.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious about the time. We are entering the last 5 minutes of this webinar. Of course, you will be available afterwards via email, and we're very happy to facilitate any contacts here as well. But maybe in the final round, I will start with you, Hassan, as well, and then Omar, and then John, for you to give like a short outlook on what's going to happen in the next few weeks, months, which is obviously within still the corona crisis, but then moving and thinking mid and long term, as you said as well. How do you see the NHS? How do you see technology moving along that line as well? Or what are your hopes in that sense as well? And maybe any last thoughts on that? I start with you, Hassan.
Thank you. So very briefly, the NHS has a team, a cross-sectional team called NHS, and they look after all of the work that we do to think about digital. They will be, in the next 4 to 6 months, sifting through all the offers to say these are the things that we want to use. Austrian companies need to be on that radar. And if they want to get on that radar, it's difficult because there's an email inbox that is full to the brim. But if you can get into that, and I can give some ideas on that now, that's the mid-term future of getting into the market. So ordinarily, I would say you need connections, go to John. He's connected. He knows lots of people in the community. He can support you get yourself a pilot and a clinical champion. I can take you to Omar and say, here's how you get your evidence and your business case. Right now, the answer is to get in front of NHS. And if you don't do that, you will be behind. So there's 2 ways of doing it. One is NHS has a web page that you can see the email address on, which is covid19@nhsx.nhs.uk. But the other way is to join a forum, and this forum is called Tech for CV19. It has 800 suppliers on it already who are filling in all of their details, and that will be given to NHS. So the answer for all Austrian companies is to think about how they can get in front of NHS.
Thank you, Omar.
So I'll take a slightly different context and a different angle to this discussion. We are moving away from a traditional sales model in the UK. We are moving away from the shoe leather approach that I'm certainly familiar with, where you would establish an entity here and send a sales force out, find yourself a clinical key opinion leader, and hope that they go and talk about your product at the various meetings that they attend, etc., etc. That let's say that performance, that institute is starting to falter. What is being driven now is the non-traditional approach. The non-traditional approach is evidence-backed. It's third-party agnostic, as we described earlier. It is systematic, and it weeds the, let's say, the naysayers, and it weeds the products that just aren't up to scratch out from those that are really can positively impact the health system. My thought for the long term, your medium and long term approach, is understand how that works, understand the concept of human factors, understand the concept of budget impact and clinical efficacy, and try and develop business cases that are really aligned with what your customer is asking. And that would be my sort of suggestion for your mid to long term.
Thank you very much, Omar, for that. John.
Well, first of all, I think Omar and Hassan are spot on, both of them, in their different answers to the questions. I think they're really comprehensive answers. Look, I think we're in a mess with COVID-19. I think the NHS and social care will rightly be lauded by the population after all of this as the beacons of hope who propelled the country towards renewed prosperity. I worry that our politicians will be left by the wayside. I don't think they've served us terribly well at the moment, and it remains to be seen what will happen in the future. The key is, I think we're going to see product development accelerate as never before. I think the idea of 48 weeks to evaluate a product before somebody gives it some kind of a nod of, yes, you should all buy this, will just go. I think the market will be driven by the excellence of the evidence that you can provide, the excellence of the build of the product and its suitability for the particular therapeutic or service area it's trying to address, and then the provider's ability to bring it to the market quickly. I think that's going to be one of the key elements, is how quickly can innovators move.
Thank you very much, Sean. And I think that sums up also the discussion in a nice positive way. So there will be something positive coming up, hopefully, in the future. And if it just means that speeding up innovation and seeing the research coming actually onto the market. And it's nice to see that there are so many, that the NHS X inbox is full of ideas and full of applications as well. And I really thank you three very, very much. We're coming to the end of these presentations. We have many more questions actually here on my screen. I will try to follow up with them individually and facilitate if necessary. And I really appreciate you all taking the time. There's 3 different approaches from 3 different sides, from the DIT, from Imperial College Healthcare Partners, and from UK Health Gateway. We appreciate your expertise as well, and we would like to follow up with you in the future. And I would also thank everyone at home watching this webinar. Please get in touch with us at london@wko.at. You see the web links where you can see and find more information, and we hope to see everyone soon again at the next webinar. And I would like to say goodbye from London, and also thank you again very much to our speakers here. I wish you a good day.
Thank you.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.